7th of March. This is Sadiq Khan bringing you the latest edition of Speak to Sadiq on LBC. I'm here for the next 30 or so minutes taking your calls. This is your chance to put any question you like to me, the Mayor of London, and I'll do my best to answer. So the numbers for you to get your questions on the air are 0345 6060 973, or you can email sadiq@lbc.co.uk, or you can text on 84850. You can also watch us, Speak to Sadiq, on the website lbc.co.uk or live on the LBC Facebook page. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Sadiq Khan. Many thanks indeed for your time this morning. I was, of course, joking a moment ago when I suggested that it's disgusting you should choose to spend your time in this studio instead of being out there actually trying to catch criminals yourself. It was a satirical reflection upon the attitudes of some right-wing media, but congratulations to Alan, who's already been in touch to suggest with a straight face that you should have a stab vest on and be out there catching criminals. Should we begin with your holiday that some people suggested you shouldn't have taken in the hours immediately after the murder in Romford at the weekend?
Well, I was away at the office on Monday, and during the time I was at the office on Monday, but also during the course of this weekend, I was in constant touch with not just the Met Police Commissioner.
So you took a whole day off?
And the city. I was at the office on Monday, exactly, and on Saturday I spoke to LBC and many others, and I spoke to actually the representatives in Romford who were affected by Jodie Chesney's horrible stabbing. And, during the time I was at the office on Monday, I was in constant touch with the Commissioner. And I know your colleague, Nick Ferrari, asked both the Commissioner about this on Tuesday, and Bernard Hogan about this on Monday. And I'm pleased both the Commissioner and the former Commissioner said that I'm always in touch with them. I work extremely hard and I don't take my responsibilities lightly. I know Nick Ferrari didn't hold his mate Boris up to the same standard.
Well, if you've got a beef with Nick, you're more than welcome to talk to him.
Well, Nick knows my issues with partial presenters, but the point is this. Look, taking one day off at the office on Monday, if I thought being at the office on Monday would impact my ability to be the best mayor I can be, I wouldn't be at the office at all. People can accuse me of many things, but not being a full-time mayor, not being a workaholic is not one of them.
I can predict what the early questions are going to be, obviously, today. The death toll continues to rise nationally. The argument over police cuts continues to rage. The Home Secretary Sajid Javid, whether through good faith or leadership ambitions, we would never know, is positioning himself in direct opposition to Theresa May. It's clear that having more police officers has an impact upon all crime in some way, shape or form. Otherwise there'd be no point having police officers at all. But it's also clear that on your watch things are going horribly, horribly wrong. And I want to know whether or not you bear any responsibility for that.
Well, as the Mayor of London, the buck stops with me as far as London is concerned, and a whole host of issues, some within my direct control, some within my indirect control. There aren't any actually, silver linings to what's happened over the last few days. But one thing that the fact that the national media is reporting the horrible homicides in Oxford, in Manchester, in Birmingham, in Liverpool, has done is focus national politicians' attention on this issue. I've been banging my head against a brick wall for the last 2-3 years, coming on LBC and other programmes, regularly lobbying the government for more resources, not just for policing, by the way, but for preventative services. It is a fact. Over the last 8 years, here in our city, we've lost more than £800 million from our Met Police Service, hundreds from councils and preventative services.
With respect, we have heard all this before, so let's look at something we perhaps haven't heard before, which is the £62 million that you're spending on staff, which your critics suggest is a major increase on what Boris Johnson spent, even £25 million more.
Sure, let me deal with that. Since 2000, since the office of the Mayor was first set up, the government's been given London more powers and more resources, devolution. So in the last 3 years, we've managed to negotiate from the government an additional £4 billion for housing. We've also managed to get the adult education budget devolved to us.
I'm not asking about that. I'm asking about your wages bill.
If we get more powers, we need more staff. And that's what this leads to. So the criticism is, by having more staff to make sure the monies for housing is spent, by having more staff to be in charge of adult education, we're being criticised. So what's happened is this, and this is why it's really important that, with respect, I'm allowed to finish.
Of course.
Because we are now in charge of adult education, we've got to employ staff to make sure that money is spent. Because we're in charge of £4 billion in relation to housing, we need staff to make sure that money is spent. So the Royal Docks is an example in relation to the work we're doing, and we're investing in Royal Docks. So the staff we've employed aren't sitting around twiddling their thumbs. They're doing adult education, they're doing housing, they're doing work that's required because the government's given us more powers.
Yeah, I appreciate it's simplistic and for you frustrating, this line of questioning.
But it's gone up over the last 18 years because we've got more powers over the last 18 years.
But the bottom line is that every penny spent on anything other than knife crime is a penny that people listening to this programme at the moment will be thinking to themselves that could be spent on policing. So tell them why it isn't.
No, sure, but that's why it's so dishonest for Tory politicians to make it this cheap point, because the money is ring-fenced. So the money we're given for adult education, I can't spend on policing.
What does ring-fence mean? Ring-fence by whom? By what legislation?
Yeah,
so
by the
any money that you receive to spend on clean air, to spend on education, to spend on cycle lanes?
So the way you think about it is...
So cycle lanes specifically?
Yeah, that comes from that's devolved from public affairs.
What exactly are you allowed to redirect funds on then? Where are you allowed to take money from in order to put it into policing?
So on the council tax bill your listeners will receive regularly, if they look at one of the lines says police precept on council tax, and so in the 8 years before I became mayor, that said 0, because the previous mayor refused to say there was no increase, I beg your pardon, in relation to the police precept. In my first 3 years as mayor, James, what I've done with the council tax police precept is increase it to the maximum allowed to do by law. So in my first 3 years, I've invested the maximum amount I'm allowed to do by law from council tax. The second thing I've done, which is innovative, which is use business rates money to invest not just in policing, but in Young Londoners too, in the Young Londoners Fund. So I diverted last year and this year, roughly speaking, £50 million from business rates to manage the decline in police officer numbers. But also what I've done is use business rates money to invest in youth services. Why? Because we've seen from central government a massive cut in both these two things, police numbers, but also in youth service as well. So all the tools I've got in relation to raising funds, I'm doing to invest in not just policing, but preventative services too. The point I make is this.
You know what the problem is here, not just for me, but for everybody listening to this, regardless of their political complexion. The problem here is that you never sound as if you accept that you have been doing something wrong or you could have done something different. People's children are dying for good or for ill. The deaths are now seeping into sections of society that don't expect to be dealing with this on a daily basis. Tragically, we live in a city where some communities, some quarters do expect to be dealing with this sort of crime on a daily basis. And every time you come in here, you're fluent, you're persuasive, you're convincing, but you never give anybody the vaguest impression,
James,
that this A, keeps you awake at night, and B, it could in some sense be partly your fault.
I hope you can see from my face in relation to the impact it has on my well-being and my health, in relation to my concerns about safety. I meet bereaved families all the time. I can't believe anybody who meets a bereaved family doesn't have an impact on them. I've been to too many funerals, I met too many bereaved and grieving siblings. But you saw this week how frustrated the chair of the National Police Chief Councils was, Sarah Thornton. You saw the Commissioner of the Met Police Service this week on Tuesday, To Sadiq, and you've seen former Met Police Commissioners from Lord Stevens to Lord Blair, but also you've seen Chief Constables across the country, police officers from rank and file, but also youth services and others, expressing their concerns across the country. Now, James, look, I'm not making excuses for my imperfections.
Well, give me an I wish then. Give me an I wish I'd done that. That was a mistake. I wish I'd done that.
I wish I'd been more effective at getting the Prime Minister to meet me. She's not met me.
That's
to discuss
passing the
this.
blame to the Prime Minister in a way.
But you know, in 2002, there was a massive increase in street crime. What did the Prime Minister do then? Tony Blair convened Cobra. He demanded every week to meet all the Secretaries of State affected. The police and crime commissioners in those days didn't exist. They were chief constables. And he banged heads together. What I'm saying is this. I've not got the powers to do the things I'd like to do or the resources. My frustration, I wish I'd done more of, is being more effective at getting more powers and resources for our city. Now, this week you've seen, because of the horrific events in Manchester, in Birmingham, in Oxford, in London, finally the Prime Minister realised there needs to be some action. Now, her response is one-off knife crime summit. My point is convene Cobra and get all the heads banged together to have action.
This is supposed to be a phone-in, of course.
So there are a number of questions. I'm not sure which one I'm taking.
Go to number one first.
The first one is John from Billericay. Good morning, John.
Morning, Sadiq. I spent 10 years in the Met Police on a response team in the East End of London. 10 years, which I greatly enjoyed. My question to you is, in September 2015, you said that you would do everything in your power to cut, stop and search. My question is, do you regret taking that stance, and do you now see the invaluable resource that stop and search is in combating people that carry knives and knife crime?
Well, John, firstly, thank you for your 10-year service as a Met Police officer. I'm very grateful, as indeed is London. What I said was it's really important to understand what I said. What I said was, on an industrial scale, indiscriminate use of stop and search can be counterproductive. Why? Because if somebody is stopped and searched wrongly today, tomorrow, his willingness to come forward and provide intelligence, be a witness, or his family's is limited. The big game changer, John, in the Met Police Service since I became mayor, you'll have spoken to former colleagues who are still working, is the body-worn video. So we've had the biggest rollout of body-worn videos of any city in the world, 21,000. Why is that important? It gives police officers the confidence to use the valuable tool that stop and search is, to do their stops and search, knowing there won't be the vexatious complaint being made. But secondly, the public has confidence in this very, very useful tool. And you know what? Stop and search has gone up in London over the recent past, but the number of complaints has gone down. And I think body-worn video is a big game changer, John.
Sorry, John, carry on.
I agree with you massively about body-worn video camera. It's made a massive, massive difference. But I would just like to say that in my 10 years on a response team, not once did I ever conduct a stop and search that wasn't anything other than based on my experiences as a police officer. And that was exactly the same for everybody else on my response team. We would never, ever just say, oh, look at him, let's stop him. There'd always be a reason. It could be that they were in an area of high crime. It could be that we knew that they carried weapons. It was always real-time, intelligence-led. And the thing that really frustrates me and my former colleagues is that, I'm not necessarily saying you, but a lot of mainstream media push the agenda that stop and search is just based purely on the colour of people's skin. And it is absolutely not. And that's from 10 years, 10 years of experience. It breaks my heart. It breaks my heart to see Londoners, young Londoners, having their lives cut short due to knife crime. It's an absolute waste of life. Well, John, let me
tell you this. When you meet, thank you for what you said, by the way, and I think you've been a better advocate of stop and search than I ever could be. When I meet bereaved families, let me tell you the thing about London. 6 out of 10 victims of crime, it may be 7 out of 10 now, are black, Asian, minority ethnic families. So it's black communities affected by this issue. And what's important is I've seen for myself the impact the City Hall funded Violent Crime Task Force have using stop and search, both Section 1 and Section 60. What it's led to, just in the first 8 months of operation, John, you'll know this being a respond officer, is 3,000 arrests leading to charges being made, but also 1,000 knives, guns and offensive weapons have been taken off our streets because of this very useful tool of stop and search. So you're articulating the importance value of stop and search, but you have to accept surely that there are some parts of London's community who are suspicious about stop and search. And that's why I'm hoping the body-worn video will give that trust and confidence we want Londoners to have about this useful tool.
Also, for the record, John, as I'm sure you know, no one would doubt a single syllable of your description of your own career, but any LBC presenter can open up their phone lines and hear compelling and persuasive evidence that some of your colleagues, past and present, may not have acted with quite the levels of probity that you do. But following on from your question, Christine Goodall heads up or co-founded Medics Against Violence in Scotland, where this adoption of a public health approach has, as you know, Sadiq Khan, prompted a significant decline in youth violence. Glasgow in particular seems to have got something right. Mindful of the danger of turning it into a sort of mythical holy grail, respond to her words. You can arrest as many people as you like. You can search as many people as you like. You can throw away the key if you want to. It just won't solve the problem. And before you respond, factor into that claim the freedom of information request that it took The Guardian over a year to get out of the Home Office, that shows 1 in 5 victims of knife murders are female. Half of them are from outside London. Once you get out of the capital, black kids make up a minority of those killed nationally, even if they are overrepresented in the capital. So with respect to John and with respect to some of my more excitable colleagues on the right wing of the British media, this obsession with stop and search actually misses some of the bigger points about the problem that faces the entire country, not just certain parts of it.
So we've examined not just experts in Glasgow, but also Chicago, Boston and elsewhere. Enforcement does have a big role to play. And when you speak to the Glasgow team, they don't underestimate the importance of enforcement. By itself, not enough, though. And that's the point that Team in Glasgow are making. You need to do preventative action as well. And that's why working collegiately with the police, the NHS, local councils, schools, social services, Ministry of Justice and others, you can get the data to make interventions earlier to make sure somebody who may in the future get involved in violent crime, join a criminal gang, doesn't. Intervention is really, really important. And that's what the public health approach is about. In simplistic terms, treat violent crime like an infection. So you want to stop an infection occurring in the first place. That's the preventative measures. But you've got to address the infection and stop it spreading. So it's an all-round holistic approach. And the criticism that experts have across the country, by the way, is the fact that you're not having joined-upness is the one concern. That's why the Prime Minister leading is very important. But secondly, if you've got a situation where not just police officers are being cut, but also preventative services, youth services, mental health services, CAMS, schools, it leads to a situation where violent crime across the country is going up.
I would be happy to talk about nothing else for the duration of your visit today, and I suspect some of my listeners would as well, but there are myriad other issues facing the city, of course, of which you're mayor, and the country in general. So we'll move on shortly. Before we do, I want to ask you for approximately the 7 millionth time to put a metric in place, a measure in place. At what point will you be judged by your record on this issue, rather than complaining that Theresa May won't see you, complaining that they won't give you more money, complaining that your hands are tied by legislation and ring fencing? You will do your best, we presume that of all politicians, to address this problem. I think of Rory Stewart's example, the Conservative Prisons Minister, who says if violence and drug taking has not gone down in these 10 prisons by date X, I will resign. Not asking you necessarily for a resignation deadline, but I'm asking you for a deadline.
The two key things I keep an eye on, and this is based upon expert advice, is the numbers of under 25s who are injured using knives. That's an important metric for reasons you'll appreciate. I can explain if you want me to. And the second thing is the number of homicides in our city. I want to see progress made on both those two things.
By when?
As soon as possible.
Well, at what point can I say to you when you sit here, you have failed, Mr. Mayor?
I go month by month. And so just
you're not going to give me one?
So no. So I want to see this year versus last year, there have been progress made in fewer homicides and fewer under 25s injured by knife crime. So I'm not going to go way into the future.
Okay, but if the numbers go up year on year, you've failed.
Well, it's not a question of me failing. It's a question of saying.
That's what I'm asking.
Hold on a sec. It's a question based on a false premise. It's a question based on the idea that London is an island where we have the resources and powers we need.
No. It's a question which actually allows you to set your own premise. By what measure will you be judged? Year on year, if the numbers go up, you've failed.
I want to see fewer homicides, and I want to see fewer under 25s.
We all want to see fewer homicides. It's like mother love and apple pie. If the numbers go up year on year, is it something you are responsible for?
I'm the Police and Crime Commissioner. I've accepted that of course I'm responsible partly. I set the priorities. I'll give you one example. It was my decision to move resources from roads and transport to be part of the City Hall funded Violent Crime Task Force. So when Philip Hammond says we've got to be prioritising, we already are in the Met Police Service. We have 300 officers doing just this work. So I've accepted responsibility and directed a movement of those officers. Other examples I can give.
Let's move on.
The next question, I think, is from Milton Keynes, James.
Yes,
it's Lee from Milton Keynes. Lee, good morning.
Good morning, Sadiq. How are you?
Not bad, actually. What's your question, Lee?
My question is that given the huge Jewish community that spreads across all the London boroughs and the wider picture in terms of the country, what do you think the kind of brass tacks of it that Jeremy Corbyn either hasn't done or needs to do? He's kind of sitting on a fence that is just he's not going one way or another. He's just not dealing with it. But what do you think he needs to do to sort this out?
Before you answer that, some breaking news from the Equality and Human Rights Commission, who've just released a statement saying, having received a number of complaints regarding anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, we believe Labour may have unlawfully discriminated against people because of their ethnicity and religious beliefs. Our concerns are sufficient for us to consider using our statutory enforcement powers as set out in our enforcement policy. We are now engaging with the Labour Party to give them an opportunity to respond. The shame, Sadiq Khan.
I welcome this investigation from the Equality and Human Rights Commission. The way the Labour Party has dealt with very serious allegations of anti-Semitism from Labour Party members has been too slow. It's been too lax. And by the way, Lee, the size of the Jewish population doesn't matter. it's actually a small population. That shouldn't matter. Anti-Semitism is a form of racism, and the impression we as a party have given is that there is a hierarchy when it comes to racism, and skin colour is more serious than being Jewish. And my concern has been, and I've said this for some time, that we as a party shouldn't simply reflect society, we should seek to shape it. My expectations from the Labour Party, by the way, are far higher than my expectations from other political parties. I want us to be a beacon. We have been too slow, and I think when I meet members of the Jewish community, I met with the Jewish Labour movement last week, when I speak to friends like Luciana Berger, their experience confirms to me we've been too slow to act. And if it takes the Equalities and Human Rights Commission stepping in to investigate for us to make sure we improve our game, then so be it.
So to specifically answer Lee's question, extrapolating from what you've just said, Jeremy Corbyn actually should sit down and be quiet and allow a full, independent and complete investigation into what's been going on in the Labour Party to be conducted by the Equality and Human Rights Commission. We
as a party need to make sure we've got the staff to swiftly investigate those against whom complaints have been made, kick them out. There's got to be due process. If they want to appeal, they can appeal. There's got to be resolute action from us as a party, separately cooperate fully with the Equalities and Human Rights Commissioners. Let them come in and look at what we're doing, but also to advise the party what more we need to do. And let me be quite clear, Lee. We need to do our utmost to win back the trust and confidence of Jewish communities up and down this country, not do the minimum required by the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, but go over and above to win back the trust and confidence of the Jewish community. And actually, Lee, the smaller the community, the bigger our responsibility. It shouldn't be down to size.
Lee, I hope that satisfies you. I'd like to move you briefly, if I may, to the 14 expulsions from the Conservative membership in the last 24 hours after they were found to have been posting clearly vile anti-Muslim hatred on various fan sites for Jacob Rees-Mogg, and so I think a councillor has been suspended for running a Boris Johnson site that encouraged people to set fire to men and women of colour. I realised yesterday while discussing this that I've been gaslit, largely because of you, because the anti-Muslim hatred that comes into this studio, I stopped looking at it a few months ago, and which appears routinely on the LBC Facebook page, is so commonplace and so pervasive. It's almost as if it's become so huge, you'll just close your eyes to it and turn away. When Labour is expected to hold itself to the very highest standards with regard to anti-Semitism, I think a lot of people who like the Labour Party and don't necessarily like the leadership are still profoundly troubled that the Conservatives seem to be getting... Saida Varsi, if she was here now, would probably agree that the Conservatives seem to be getting a free pass on their members, not just their members, but fan pages dedicated to prominent Conservative politicians, in this case Jacob Rees-Mogg, putting stuff that's borderline criminal, and nobody notices until we highlight it on this radio page, or the Mates Racist for Rees-Mogg Twitter account highlights it on social media. Is there a double standard here, do you think?
There is a double standard. My concern is the Labour Party, not the Tory Party.
Of course.
Anybody who just looked...
Well, anti-Muslim hatred should be a concern of everyone, not just Muslim.
No, but anybody who looked at the campaign run by the Conservatives in 2016, no apology from the Tory candidate, no apology from his campaign team, no apology from the party, no apologies from the mainstream media who amplified some of the division and hatred from that campaign. And I still receive that hatred and Islamophobic comments from Tory members now in 2019. And I think it's really important.
Do you ever report them?
The staff in City Hall report regularly some of the stuff we receive on social media, some of the stuff we receive from people rocking up to City Hall, some of the people who come to question times that you've been at. And so my concern is this: we mustn't, as a party, as the Labour Party, not lose sight of the problems we as a party have got when we highlight some of the concerns people have raised about the Conservative Party and Islamophobia. There are real problems there, and it's incumbent on decent Tories to make sure that those Islamophobes who are members of the Tory Party are kicked out of their party as well.
Carry on.
The next question is from Lee. Thank you for your question. The next question is from Reading, and it's Ali. Good morning, Ali.
Good morning.
What's your question, Ali?
I've just been asked to come and talk about the Crossrail project. And just in terms of, again, yesterday there was an announcement that the project is yet, the completion date is uncertain. And I'm not going to ask the question of Sadiq Khan why is late, because I know the standard answers will come through. But the fact that the project is running late is not unusual. Most projects run late, and most people who have domestic projects of kitchen fit-outs would have experienced that. but the key is, I mean, I've been in this industry. We specialise in project time compression. We see this all the time, and I've been involved with government measuring data. The key to these kinds of projects is the confidence for sort of people like Sadiq Khan or Grayling, the minister, who are. So
just give me a question in a sentence, if you can, Ali.
Right. So the question is,
what's going on? How confident is you? Yes, and we've got some new developments from the chief executive. The new chief executive, of course, refused to confirm any date for when the railway will open. I'm going to take Ali's analogy of a kitchen fitter. I don't know when you last had building work done, but if the contractor had said to you after several, hundreds of thousands of pounds had been spent, in this case millions, he just sucks his teeth, chews his pencil and says, well, hopefully might be done in 2020, might not. No one would countenance that on a domestic level. Why are we countenancing that on a urban level?
To follow the analogy through, Ali, I wasn't happy with the previous foreman in charge of the kitchen project, so he was asked to go. I've now got a new foreman in charge of the project and a new chair and a new chief executive. They've said to me that the work done previously by the previous foreman wasn't good enough. The answers they were given weren't satisfactory. They've said to me, can we have until April to give you a deadline when the job will be finished and how much it will cost? I think that's quite reasonable. What I don't
as
want
in
to do,
next month.
As in next month.
So you're expecting a deadline and a final budget by next month, which won't be cast in stone, pardon the pun, but it will be something that presumably entails penalties. We think we've got an idea of the size of the budget, Ali. We think that the ceiling figure is approaching £2 billion of additional costs for the project. What I want from the chief executive, the new chief executive and the new chair is honest answers as to when it'll be finished, including stations and the train. They think by end of Q1, so they think by April they'll be able to give me an answer when that'll be. What I've said to them is don't either be too risk averse or be too optimistic. Be honest, because people make plans according to deadline, whether that's businesses opening up, people moving into properties and their stations, and so on an answer which I can have confidence in, because what's clear to me is the previous foreman didn't give me the right answers in relation to expectations. And we know that the new chairman, Tony Meggs, and the permanent transport secretary, Bernadette Kelly, when asked who was responsible for this screw-up, the continuing delays, they talk of systematic failures rather than the fault of any individuals. Meggs referred to a culture of over-optimism that had led to the poor reporting of information upwards. Now, I know what you know, that I know what Ali means when he talks about what appear to be stock answers and pat answers. Blame it on the predecessor, blame it on the Prime Minister, blame it on the boogie. Will anybody actually have their name in the news as bearing responsibility for these delays and these problems? Will they be punished? Will they be held to account in the way that most of us, if we messed up on a spectacular scale at work, would expect to be?
And that's what the Public Accounts Committee was doing and is doing. So the Public Accounts Committee, you'll be aware, is a House of Commons Select Committee, and they'll be looking into this, Ali, going forward as well, to make sure not simply we can make sure the right people are held responsible, but lessons are learned going forward, and it's really important we do that. £1.3 billion worth of bailout from the GLA. We were talking about allocation of funds earlier. That's I don't know how many garden bridges that is. It's about 3, isn't it? Yes, this is money we're having to pay because of the kitchen extension running overdue and stuff, and it's a lot of money. And
see, if my builder goes overdue, he pays me.
Yeah, no, the way the contracts were set up, that wasn't the case. So the contracts, many of them, to be fair, were 2008, 2009, and there is an optimism bias. And these are long contracts, and so there isn't, I'm afraid, Ali, James, a situation where there's penalty clauses for the old ones. The new contracts are really important in relation to the contracts we do with the new contractors and subcontractors to make sure there's an incentive for them to finish as soon as possible and finish on time.
So this is something that you'd lay at the feet of your predecessors rather than yourself.
Don't look at what I think. Look at what the Public Accounts Committee thinks.
Yes, no, that's a fair point. That's a fair point. Ali, do you want to come back on that?
Yes, please. I think I'm hearing the usual again. We are trying to make sure everything's done, but and also incentivizing the completion is actually the wrong thing. What needs to do is that we need a system. Mr. Sadiq Khan and Mr. Grayling need to think about, what is the system? How effective is the project is being managed daily?
Almost like an ongoing
view,
audit.
If I may add,
of course.
In my view, project management is knowing the impact of every task on the end date daily. And if they knew that today, we wouldn't be having to wait till April to know when the end date is. And Mr. Khan should demand, as many government reports have suggested, the clients need to be much more demanding when it comes to project delivery. He should demand that every day they report to him, they make it public on the internet, what any movement to the completion date, like a sat-nav does. It tells you, when you
should get Ali on the team, shouldn't you? You should hire him.
Well, can I just say in relation to the questions that Ali raises? So firstly, the government and City Hall, when this was originally set up, they learnt the lessons from High Speed 1 and the Olympics, which were successful projects. And so I'm not criticising the way Crossrail was set up in relation to the autonomy given to the Crossrail board. All the evidence from High Speed 1 and the Olympics were successful to have politicians not being directly hands-on. The problem in this case was because of that situation, the politicians, whether you're the DFT or City Hall, were given information where there was an optimism bias. Now that we have a new team in place, Ali, we are getting that sort of rigour and that sort of data, and we're also having more transparency. Previously, the Crossrail Limited board kept to themselves a lot of this information, and a lot of the information the DFT and TfL were given wasn't accurate. There was the optimism bias. I'm confident that's changed with the new team, and some of the lessons you're talking about has been learnt going forward.
£800,000 worth of bonuses 7 months ago for Crossrail chiefs.
And TfL, we complained about that, and the previous chair said that we've got no locus to interfere with that. So the TfL salaries have been frozen above £100,000. The Crossrail Limited ones weren't, and that's one of the concerns.
There's nothing you can do to get those bonuses back.
No. So the remuneration committee the TfL remuneration committee wrote to Crossrail saying we're not happy with this. You shouldn't be doing this, and we were told tax
this
off our lawn.
This is insane. I can only draw a parallel with my own sphere of experience. If my audience here goes up by a significant amount, I get a nice bonus. I might buy you lunch if you behave. But if it goes down, I don't. These guys have failed to deliver, and they still got their bonus.
Correct. They call them golden goodbyes, as well as the salaries they receive and the bonuses they received. And both Transport for London and the DFT, even though they're sponsoring this project, had no say over the remuneration of the bonuses that the previous staff received. And the silver lining, if you like, is the new chief executive, the new chair, the new deputy chair receive less than the previous team did, because we're trying to make sure we can cut down whenever we can.
I suppose we should just be grateful that it is actually getting built at enormous cost to the public, unlike the Garden Bridge, which didn't even get built despite enormous cost to the public. We've got time for one more question from
and it's from Rochester, and it's Anne. Good morning, Anne.
Hello, Mr. Mayor.
Hi, Anne.
It's bad news again, I'm afraid. I heard on the news yesterday that the Met Police have said there'll be no charges for another 3 years in the Grenfell Tower disaster. I just can't believe that this is another inquiry that's been kicked down the road and is going to be years and years while people's lives are still at risk.
This is the news that criminal charges may not be considered until 2021. It's not an area over which you have any authority, but Anne is seeking reassurance from her mayor.
Yeah, and so I meet regularly the Grenfell Tower fire victims, survivors, families in the community affected, and they'll be incredibly distressed by this news. What they want is justice. Now, the police, to give the police credit, want to make sure they investigate properly what happened at Grenfell Tower, the causes, who's responsible, who's accountable. And so what the police have said is, look, we have hundreds of officers investigating this matter. They're going to carry on investigating this matter. But the Grenfell Tower Inquiry Part 2, which won't begin this year, may not begin until next year, we think is important for us to see the evidence that comes out of the Grenfell Tower inquiry. And we can't conclude our investigation, and the CPS can't decide whether charges should be brought until that's happened. Now, just following that through logically, that means, unfortunately, that might not be until 2021, 2022. That's no comfort if you're a Grenfell Tower survivor, even more so if you've not been permanently rehoused, if you're not receiving the help you receive. I know it's distressing, and I speak to survivors and victims and the community all the time, but I can't criticise the police for wanting to make sure they have a proper investigation so justice can be done.
I suppose, not to be too grisly, the more painstaking the process, the greater the likelihood of charges being brought.
Well, let me tell you why it's important, because Part 1 dealt with the horrible night. Part 2 deals with the weeks, months, years preceding that. So, for example, the cladding, the contracting, where the TMO's warnings ignored, who is accountable. And so actually, and this part 2 is as important, if not more important than part 1 in relation to some of the issues that Anne's referred to and that the residents are concerned about. What caused it? Is there any criminal liability? And that's what's important, Anne. What residents want is justice to be done, for people to be held to account. And I think that's why I can't criticise the police for saying, you know what, we're doing really good investigations. We've got hundreds of officers involved, but some things may come out in part 2 of the inquiry which may impact the investigation. And we'd criticise the police, by the way, if they closed their investigation now or prematurely said no action and then things were uncovered in part 2 of the inquiry.
I'd also add, because I share your concerns and your upset, Anne, I'd add 2 things. The first is that, as Sir Martin Morbick reminded us at the close of the inquiry's first phase towards the end of last year, there were 200,000 documents that had yet to be disclosed to the inquiry. And I'll give you a personal assurance that however long it takes, and whoever is in City Hall, there are members of my profession, myself included, for as long as I have a job, who will be following this story as closely as is humanly possible, however long it takes. And I hope that reassures you in part. Sadiq Khan, we've almost finished. I need to end by asking you why you've banned butter adverts from the London Underground.
We haven't. What we've done is this. Look, we've got a big issue in relation to child obesity in London. London is the obesity overweight capital of Europe. 40% of 10 and 11-year-olds in London are obese or overweight. What we've done is ban junk food adverts, foods that are high in fats, sugar and salts. Anybody advertising butter, olive oil, bacon can simply apply for an exemption from TfL and they'll be exempt. It's those adverts that target children that are banned, not adverts for butter or bacon or butter.
So it's a teething problem, this ban on the advert from Farm Drop.
What happened was...
And actually, I would add, in the context of being a corrective to some of the misleading and deceptive right-wing coverage of these issues, that Farm Drops themselves have said they approve of the ban. They just accept that in this first instance. Because if you've got a ban on stuff that's high-fat content, and then you've got a chunk of butter that's basically a chunk of fat, it's a loophole at the moment that obviously has high-fat content. It's as if you've got a tub of fat, labelled fat, which gets banned from being advertised because it's got so much fat in it. You need to deal with this.
The issue is are these adverts targeting children? I think the issue in this case was the company just forgot to apply for an exception, and that's been sorted out, and you'll have these teething problems and stuff.
Are you sure about that? Because they've sort of photoshopped their advert, sent it back, and been told again that it's not up to sniff.
No, the TfL and this company have sorted out the differences and stuff. They've been ironed out, and just to reassure your listeners who like to see adverts of butter and other issues, what we're targeting is adverts that direct parents and carers towards their children having to,
So there were children in this Farm Drop advert, which would have meant that it flashed up on TfL's radar.
What happens is this: if there are things that target towards adults, not children,
yes,
you can apply for an exception.
Okay.
This company forgot to do so. They didn't want to reshoot the photograph, and so they just did a cut and paste job. If they wanted to, they could have reshot it in a different way or applied for an exception. These are teething problems, but the key thing is this: we've got this obesity problem. This and I'm not going to stand by whilst we've got a situation where children have health issues because of being obese, overweight. And by the way, it's poorer children who suffer more from obesity and overweightness than more affluent children. That's why we've got to take action.
I should mention, by way of balance, that the Sun newspaper today publishes an attack upon this ban from somebody described as the head of lifestyle economics at the Institute of Economic Affairs. We will, of course, be happy to hear from them when they reveal who funds them. Sadiq Khan, many thanks.
Always a pleasure.
It's 10:41.
LBC at the weekend. Matt Fry.
When you see what he's done in terms of following up on accusations of anti-Semitism, and then you've got Jenny Formby, the General Secretary of the party, slapping him down the way that she did, what is